Hi, good afternoon. I would like to introduce Zuhair Ahmed from MongoDB and Dan Blanco from AWS, who are going to be giving a presentation on how to get started with MongoDB using the AWS CDK. So without any further ado, guys, if you want to come on the stage.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So my name is Zuhair Ahmed. I'm a senior product manager at MongoDB. Super excited to talk to you today about the wonderful world of our MongoDB Atlas integration with AWS CDK. I'm joined by our partner in crime from AWS, Dan. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Dan. I am a developer advocate for infrastructure as code at AWS, and that is products from the CDK, SAM, and CloudFormation.
Cool. All right. So today on the agenda, we'll be having a quick talk about the dreadful life before CDK. So you can think circa 2019, just to give you an idea how fast some of these things have been changing. Why use IAC or infrastructure as code tools on AWS? In particular, Dan's going to take over and talk a little bit deep dive on AWS specific tooling on infrastructure as code. We have a demo prepared for you guys on our new integration with the CDK and MongoDB Atlas. And then where can we get started today? If all that makes sense, let's get started. So just, quick show of hands. How many people have actually heard of the AWS CDK? All right, so we have a few people. How many people have actually, keep your hands up, how many people have actually used the AWS CDK? All right, so it's great. So this is like an intermediary level talk. We have some background knowledge. You don't have to know any of it. So we'll be walking through the fundamental basics of infrastructure as code as well as CDK. And just to kick it off, I want to introduce you to Jane. Jane is an engineering manager right here in New York City. She runs a virtual reality startup. For years, she's been heavily invested in the DevOps ecosystem within AWS, and she's been a good steward of the AWS CloudFormation ecosystem. So she writes CloudFormation templates, typically in JSON or YAML. She is able to integrate with MongoDB Atlas now that we're supported on CloudFormation. But one day, due to her own success, her organization has scaled tremendously, both in the metaverse as well as in the real world. And all of a sudden, her team of 5 engineers has grown to 50. So as part of this new reality, CloudFormation itself, while itself is awesome, isn't fast enough to keep up with the speed of her development of her new team. A fun fact about virtual reality, a lot of the web apps are actually written in JavaScript and TypeScript. So her 50 engineers, they're deep experts in JavaScript and TypeScript. They want to stay in that ecosystem as much as possible, but they're being slowed down by CloudFormation and being forced to write all their infrastructure provisioning in JSON and YAML. So her team is very sad. Development comes down to a halt. But Jane, being the optimistic and ever persevering person that she is, finds out, she comes to MongoDB.local NYC, and she learns about our new integration with the AWS CDK. And like a light bulb, it comes off. She's able to deploy her MongoDB Atlas and AWS infrastructure with code on AWS. So now her team's able to write in JavaScript and TypeScript all her infrastructure deployments and able to deploy much faster. Here at MongoDB and at AWS, we like to meet developers where you are. So if your world is in JavaScript and TypeScript, we want you to be as frictionless as possible. You shouldn't have to be forced to use a world dominated by YAML anymore. So just take a quick step back. Why use infrastructure as code? Why use CloudFormation? Why use the CDK? First and foremost is automation. So let's say you build up an environment, a dev or test environment, and you now want to move to prod. Why would you go back to the AWS Management Console or the Atlas UI and recreate everything? Well, you can just copy and paste, and all of a sudden you have your prod environment. So you're able to get up and running in minutes. You have version control. So the ability to check in your infrastructure code just as source code into a GitHub repository or Bitbucket. Is super valuable. It provides an additional level of transparency and collaboration on your infrastructure side, so you can help raise the bar there. You have security benefits, so you get to have a clear audit trail of every infrastructure modification. Who's making what change when? super valuable for an organization. Disaster recovery. So the ability, whenever a cloud region goes out, you're able to recreate your environment in minutes. And last but not least, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention cost savings. So with infrastructure as code, you're able to have full visibility of your infrastructure stack. Whatever you're running on, if you're over-provisioned, if you're using an M10 cluster and instead you need something smaller, something bigger, all that becomes visible. So you get to have potentially a lower MongoDB and AWS bill, as well as potentially lower carbon impact as well, for preventing your cloud resources from being over-provisioned. This is a fun statistic. So this is from JetBrains, one of our partners. They did a recent survey and they asked, what infrastructure provisioning tool do you use? And you might see a few familiar names here like Terraform and CloudFormation and the CDK. But the biggest bucket, the plurality, was actually none. So just by coming here today and just by dipping your toes a little bit deeper into infrastructure as code, you get to very easily move your infrastructure teams from a 50% developer to a 90% developer. Okay, a quick look under the hood. This is actually my favorite slide, and it really goes back to the whole notion of abstraction, right? So at the foundation, the way that everything works with our CloudFormation and CDK integrations starts with the Atlas Admin API. Okay, so the MongoDB Atlas Admin API. This is a RESTful API service. You can do everything. You can spin up a cluster, you can create database users, you can create an IP access list, all directly using curl commands, using a HTTP standard protocols. But why would you do that when we created the Atlas Go client, right? So if you're a Go developer in particular, you don't have to write all those HTTP commands. You can have one layer of abstraction, and now you can use our Go HTTP client. But then our customers came up to us and asked us, well, this is great, but we need more. So we built out the Atlas Kubernetes operator, which is a further level of abstraction built on top of the Go client. We built out our CloudFormation resources, and we built out the Atlas CLI, or the command line interface, also built on top of the Go client. And then what's super exciting about the CDK, as we'll get into, is that the CDK, or the Cloud Development Kit, is a further layer of abstraction on top of CloudFormation. So when you spin up a MongoDB Atlas cluster, you are all of a sudden, you're synthesizing down from CDK to CloudFormation, from CloudFormation down to your Go HTTP client, and then from the Go HTTP client to the Atlas Admin API. You have 4 layers of abstraction. So being a developer today in 2023, you get an incredible amount of leverage just by adopting the CDK. So on AWS, we have a few different integrations we wanted to highlight. Dan will go into a little bit more detail on each one. But for the first is using the CloudFormation registry. So this is available in about 22 AWS regions. This allows you, if you're familiar with CloudFormation, you can write scripts in JSON and YAML, and you can do everything from creating private links to spinning up clusters to managing IP access lists, all directly from scratch if you wanted to. If you want a little bit of a speed bump, you can use the AWS Partner Solutions deployment. So these are pre-written templates in JSON or YAML. We're super excited. We have a basic Atlas deployment up now. It integrates optionally with VPC peering or AWS Private Link, or alternatively, if you want to get up and faster with a few specific AWS services, we have partner solutions or quick starts, which are integrated with AWS Fargate, as well as a analytics application with Amazon SageMaker for machine learning applications. And then last but not least, the CDK. So the AWS Cloud Development Kit, as mentioned with our story with Jane, we allow organizations to deploy Atlas clusters natively in JavaScript and TypeScript. But this wasn't enough. Our customers came up to us and said, well, Zuhair, this is wonderful, but me as a Java developer, I like working in Java. I want to stay in Maven. Well, what about me? And then our Python developers came up to us and said, hey, but I like working with PyPy, and I want to stay in a Python ecosystem. Well, what about me? So I'm super excited and happy to announce today the GA availability of the CDK support in all MongoDB Atlas supported languages. So this is our integration with Python, Java, C#, and Go. So now, just like Jane in her TypeScript ecosystem, any one of these developers can deploy MongoDB Atlas as code natively in these languages. So we're super excited to share that. A few customer success stories that I wanted to highlight. The first is from Stellantis. So this is the automaker. You may have heard of Chrysler or Dodge or Maserati. They're one of our early adopters. We're currently in the midst of migrating multiple applications to MongoDB Atlas on AWS, and this method of using the CDK integration is key to our developer workflow. So they decrease the amount of time spent manually provisioning infrastructure and more time developing high quality software. So this goes back to the whole notion of write less, do more. Another one of our early adopters, Husqvarna Group out of Sweden, this is a manufacturing company. By leveraging the automation capabilities of MongoDB Atlas integrations with CDK, we get to leverage our existing knowledge of the TypeScript ecosystem and eliminate the manual provisioning of CloudFormation templates. And this goes back to our ethos at MongoDB. We really like to meet developers where you are. And if you want to work in TypeScript, we want you to be as frictionless as possible to spin up your MongoDB Atlas resources. With that, I'll pass it off to Dan.
Thank you so very much, Zuhair. So yeah, let's actually talk about what infrastructure as code is and how AWS itself handles it. And it's all based off of a service we call AWS CloudFormation. So let's actually talk about what AWS CloudFormation is. The base layer of AWS CloudFormation, there's 3 parts to it. The first part is the registry. And what the registry is it's where we store all of our providers. And a provider is just a thing that CloudFormation can provision, right? It's an S3 bucket, it's an EC2 instance, it's all of these types of resources. And to do that, we need to understand 2 parts of a resource. We need to understand what it looks like, its inputs, its outputs, what happens if you replace some things. We also need to know how to handle all of its lifecycle functions, right? I need to create the bucket, I need to update the bucket, delete the bucket, stuff like that. Most folks tend to know that we have a lot of first-party resources, for example, S3 buckets, EC2 instances, networking components, but they tend not to know that we have a lot of third-party resources as well, and we'll talk about that kind of in the next slide. The second and third parts about CloudFormation is the language. CloudFormation is a YAML and JSON domain-specific language that allows you to describe what your infrastructure looks like, right, in a declarative way. You don't have to tell us how to build it, you just say, hey, I have a VPC with 2 subnets, and in those subnets are 3 EC2 instances, and they're connected this way, and you just describe what it looks like. The last part is the engine, which takes that description and actually makes it real. We figure out the dependency, the ordering, how we have to deploy them. We wait for everything to finish before we move on. If something goes wrong, we can roll you back into a last known good state, right? CloudFormation really emphasizes safety to make sure that your infrastructure deployments, which tend to be scary, are safe. You can, be calm about it. You can understand what's happening. And on top of this, we've built a couple more abstractions, specifically SAM and CDK. We'll be talking about CDK a lot more. SAM, you'll have to go look on your own. But the concept here is, hey, CloudFormation is great, but I tend to deploy resources as groups together. Is there any way that I can encapsulate this and deploy them as groups instead of having to write them individually? And we call this concept constructs, right? It is the grouping of a bunch of resources together to deploy them a little easier. Going back to talking about all of the third-party resources we have 20 partners that we're working with, Mongo being one of them, to be able to deploy just about any type of resource that you can think of to with AWS infrastructure as code, right? Hey, I need auth, I need databases, I need non-AWS resources that I want to control, manage using infrastructure as code. We have you supported using these. We're always bringing on more partners, so if we don't have some integration that you want, talk to that partner and say, hey, when are you bringing on CloudFormation support? Cool. On top of that, we have our partner solutions, which is custom-built CloudFormation templates with best practices applied. You may not know what the best practices for bringing up a MongoDB Atlas is. AWS and the experts at Mongo have you covered. We've taken a look at this, we've figured out what the best, safest way to deploy these things with smart defaults is, and we have them in our partner solutions. And these are cross-cutting, right? These are things like you can do analytics, you can do blockchain. There is significant coverage over all of the industries that you may be interested in. All right, with that, let's talk about what the CDK is, right? The CDK is this concept over CloudFormation, where CloudFormation is declarative, YAML, and JSON. And it's intentionally limited. It's not Turing complete. You're not going to be able, to solve every type of problem. It's meant to handle most cases in a simple way. But customers came to us and were like, hey, we need the ability to handle really complex cases in a general programming language that our team really likes. So we always try to meet customers where they are. we listened and we created the CDK to allow customers to build those infrastructure as code declarations using general programming languages to still build the same CloudFormation templates, still have that same safety, still have that same security and repeatability when you're deploying, but now I can use all of these languages that I'm really, really comfortable with. It was built in open source. We released it in 2019, and it is honestly one of the rising stars in infrastructure as code. It is one of the fastest growing products out there, and we're super, super excited to have it. But now that we've talked about what it is, let's talk about what it's not. And to do that, you have to kind of understand what a control plane is and what a data plane is. A control plane is this idea of, hey, I have an S3 bucket, I need to put stuff inside of it. But to make that bucket, I have to deal with some APIs that don't deal with the data inside the bucket. I need to call create bucket. I need to change it, I need to call delete bucket, and then create bucket again. I want to add a policy to it, I have to call create bucket policy. None of this really deals with the objects inside of the bucket, but I still need to manage that bucket in some way. I want to put items inside that bucket. Cool, I now need to call put object. I need to call delete object. I need to change the retention policy on it. Great, I can do that as well. And that is dealing with the data inside the object as opposed to the infrastructure. With that in mind, the CDK is not the SDK. The CDK deals with the bucket and the management of the bucket, its life cycle, and the SDK deals with the objects inside the bucket. Same concept with Mongo as an example, right? Cool. To go a little bit deeper on the CDK is all about constructs, bringing things together, making things simple, and we have, again, 3 types of constructs. The first type is what we call an L1 construct, and these are auto-generated, right? The CloudFormation schema, or the description of the resource, has some very basic definitions. We take them, we put them into a machine, and out pops an L1 construct. These are useful, but for folks who are just getting started, it's not where I suggest starting. These are very much auto-generated, haven't really been looked at by people. The second one is, okay, I've created a CDK construct around an S3 bucket, but I know that it is best practices to have my S3 bucket be encrypted. I know it is best practices to have my S3 bucket not be available publicly by default. These L2 constructs have that intelligent touch applied to them. Someone who has used this resource, is an expert at it, has applied, real thought to it to make it easy to consume, easy to work with, easy to manage. This is where I suggest, if you're gonna start with the CDK, starting L2 or above. And then finally, we have L3 constructs, which is collections of constructs. Hey, cool, I want to create a 3-tiered application with a presentation layer, the application layer, and my database. It has to have some networking, it has to have all of these things combined. Wouldn't it be cool if I could write one piece of CDK logic that would spin everything up for me? And that's exactly what this does. A thing to note, it's not a bad thing, it is just highly specialized. If your team is primarily serverless with NoSQL databases, Lambda functions, event bridge integrations, that 3-tiered application CDK construct's probably not going to help that much. So you would need to find a CDK construct that helps you in that specific area. Great. Where do I find these constructs? We can look at constructs.dev. It is where all of our CDK constructs live. The MongoDB construct library, for example, is it says 30 plus. Last time I checked, it was 48 plus. And it is where we store all of our constructs for ease of use. This one specifically is Atlas Basic, which Zuhair is going to be talking about in just a moment to show you how we can spin up this really cool entire concept of a Atlas cluster with users, the whole 9 yards, to make it really, really easy. And with that, I will hand it back to him for a demo. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Dan. All right, who's ready for a demo? All right, so just to get started, let's talk about a typical Atlas deployment. You're usually going to have 4 MongoDB Atlas resources in almost all instances. One is a project, a cluster, a database user, and a project IP access list. The fundamentals are really important to get right. So you can think about them as like the core building blocks, and you have to do it again and again and again. So just as a fun aside, these 4 lines, which you have to do again and again and again, typically make up around 300 lines of JSON. Right? And you can go to our repo, our MongoDB Atlas repo on GitHub, and you can actually count them. Or we can do, if you're for some advanced users, you can do CDK synth, and you'll get to actually the 300. We actually took that one level above, and we created a CDK L3 resource, as Dan was talking about on Atlas Basic, which basically combines these 4 resources together. So in addition to just having less developer overhead, you don't have to worry about the fundamentals anymore, it's fewer lines of code. So this Atlas Basic resource is only 100 lines in TypeScript. So in addition to like less friction, you get to stay focused, you get to do what you want, that's basically 200 fewer lines of code to manage, 3x boost in productivity and time savings, fewer instances of bugs or management to creep in. So if you want to do this at home, we're super excited just to do a quick setup. So the first thing you need is to do a MongoDB Atlas account. You can get this on the AWS Marketplace. You'd create an AWS account. You make sure you have your AWS CLI configured with AWS config. You then create your MongoDB Atlas programmatic API keys or packs. You store them in a secrets manager. We strongly suggest you don't hard code your secrets into this. Every single day, there's folks that hard code their secrets into their CloudFormation or CDK, and then they check it into GitHub. Using AWS Secrets Manager helps avoid that altogether. And then last but not least, you want to activate your MongoDB Atlas CloudFormation resources in your AWS region. The good news is that you don't have to memorize any of this. As part of this talk, we actually already posted this entire demo on YouTube. All you have to do is look up AWS CDK for MongoDB Atlas and TypeScript. It should be the first thing that comes up. And just a quick cheat sheet as well for folks who are following along. To do this at home, you only need to do 7 commands to get up and running on MongoDB Atlas with TypeScript on CDK. We'll be going through each one of these, but it's so short. And just as an aside, before this talk, I had my mom, who's not tech savvy at all, punch these 7 commands in, and she was able to deploy her very first MongoDB Atlas cluster on AWS. So if my mom could do it, anyone could do it. It's just 7 commands, and again, it's all available on YouTube. I wanted to share a quick snippet on just to walk through. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is npm install the AWS CDK. So this assumes a completely blank environment. You have nothing installed. You want to use -g for global fag to apply everywhere. I already have the AWS CDK installed on my machine, so that's great. So step 1 done, easy. Step 2, you're going to want to bootstrap your CDK into your environment. These 2 parameters are my AWS account number, and I'm deploying into US East 1. Right? Now, you would obviously modify this for what you want to do. And the main thing to look out for are those green check marks. CDK makes this really fun and easy. Green check marks are good. So great. Step 2, done. We basically bootstrapped. This creates the minimum amount of resources required in your CDK environment. Awesome. So step 3, we're going to CDK init the application. And again, it's super modular. If you don't want to create a TypeScript application, you can do --language Java, --language Python. And this is super helpful because this sets up all the base infrastructure. You can see on the left-hand side all the different files that have been populated for you. Awesome. Step 4, npm install the AWS CDK -resources -MongoDB Atlas. It's just one folder. This one folder is able to give you all our resources. Our 30+ resources are installed with this one command. Awesome. So now we're up and running. You basically have everything you need to actually get started right at this step. To help push things along even faster, we've actually created a bunch of examples on our GitHub repo. So we just went to our examples folder into Atlas Basic. We have an example TypeScript application just in our lib folder. We're copying it in here, and we're going to paste this into our demo app. Right? So there's only one quick modification you have to do. This is all boilerplate that we got from CDK init. We're going to cut it out. And we're going to paste in what we got from our CDK repo. And there's only one thing to keep in mind if you want to get up and start very quickly. It's the name of your class. So the name of the class that I've used here is called TestStack1. I'm using that there. Awesome. I pasted it down and saved it. Step 6, CDK diff. So this is actually a difference. This looks at what you put into your CDK application versus what's in AWS CloudFormation into your stack set, and it just looks for any differences. And you can see that we're creating 4 new CloudFormation resources: project, cluster, database user, and project IP access list. Again, one command, you're creating these 4 resources. Awesome. CDK diff is not required, but it's something that I always like to do. It's very similar to Terraform Plan, if you're familiar with that ecosystem. And then step 7, the very last thing you need to do is CDK deploy. And we're only passing in 2 parameters, our Atlas org ID and our IP address that we want to access our database, MongoDB Atlas database. And that's it. You don't need, if you're going to do this manually within CloudFormation, you have to think of like inputs for your project name, you have to think of inputs for like database username and password. Here, we're able to have intelligent defaults, as Dan was mentioning earlier. And that's it, CDK deploy. You can see it's deploying live right now. We have, again, the status bar. When you're creating a MongoDB Atlas cluster, it typically takes about 7 to 10 minutes for a brand new cluster. So with some magic, we're gonna fast forward this a little bit. I'm just gonna show you a quick look of like what this looks like in the AWS Management Console. So again, CDK is an abstraction above CloudFormation. You can actually see each of the individual CloudFormation resources here. I'm going to just jump real quick into the Events tab, and you'll see at this point the project resource has been created. You see the create complete, awesome. You can see the database user has been created, awesome. And the IP access list has been created, awesome. So the only thing we're waiting on is the actual cluster. If you go into the resources tab, you can see the same thing. 3 out of the 4 complete. We're just waiting for cluster. So super excited about that. The last thing I want to show you is actually in the Atlas UI, or the user interface. So if you are actually going to go in here and you can actually see the cluster is spinning up. This is MongoDB 6.0. We're spinning up in AWS. This is an M10 region. You can see the database user has been made. Awesome. You can see the IP access list has been added. Awesome. Again, all this was just with one CDK command, the CDK deploy. So we're super excited about that additional levels of abstraction. And the project, of course, has been created. It's on the top left-hand corner. You can see the project name. So we're gonna speed this up with some magic, and you'll see the Atlas cluster actually be created in MongoDB Atlas, and boom, there it is. So you have a live working MongoDB Atlas cluster. And then the last thing I just want to show you is like, well, okay, great, Zuhair, I have a cluster running. How do I get my connection string? Top left-hand corner, you click connect, you click on the environment you want, and you have your MongoDB SRV connection string. And you can get up and running in literally 7 commands. So we're super excited to share that. Okay, last but not least, so Jane, our virtual reality engineering manager, good news, she's hiring for her team. One of you folks may be invited to join her team. However, she wants to make sure that you're familiar with the AWS CDK and you're familiar with MongoDB Atlas. So I want you to take your smartphones out if you haven't already. This is a link. It will take you to the MongoDB Atlas listing on AWS Marketplace. The first, as an extra incentive, especially if you're looking to join Jane's startup, as extra incentive, the first 10 people who are able to recreate what we did, and the cheat code is that it's all available on YouTube as well, but the first 10 people that are able to recreate what we did, you're going to deploy an Atlas basic CDK L3 resource. You'll get the greatest gift of all time, MongoDB Atlas credits. And it's the real credits. We got approval from marketing, despite the economic environment. All you need to do is just email me, zuhair.ahmed@mongodb.com. You'll get, all I need to see is a link to your GitHub repo and a link to your live Atlas cluster. That is it, and you will get your Atlas credits and a potential job offer at Jane's startup. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time. This is a link to our survey. If you enjoyed today's talk, please give us 5 stars. If you did not enjoy this talk, please also give us 5 stars with an email explaining why. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, everyone. Thanks for coming.